Go to any doctor's office in America right now and sit in the waiting room for an hour. Count the conditions on the pamphlets on the wall: obesity, type 2 diabetes, chronic back pain, anxiety disorders, depression, hypertension, sleep disorders, autoimmune diseases, allergies. The list goes on longer than the wall can hold. Now consider this: the people who lived 10,000 years ago had none of those pamphlets. Not because they didn't have the condition, because they didn't have the condition. This is not a romanticized version of the past. This is what the bones say. When archaeologists dig up ancient hunter-gatherer skeletons and compare them to the skeletons of early farmers, people who lived just a few thousand years later with access to stored food and settled community, the difference is so dramatic it stopped researchers cold. The hunter-gatherers were taller, their bones were denser, their teeth were straighter and almost entirely cavity-free. Their joints showed almost no signs of the degenerative arthritis that quietly destroys modern knees and hips. They died of infections, of injuries, of things that got them from the outside, almost never from the inside. And here is the part that should genuinely stop you. They did all of this without a single doctor, without a single hospital, without understanding what a germ was, without iodized salt or vitamin supplements or any of the infrastructure we have built specifically to keep ourselves alive. They were just living, and their bodies were thriving in a way that ours quietly are not. So what were they doing? The strange answer is that they weren't doing anything. They weren't optimizing. They weren't biohacking. They weren't trying to live longer. Most of them had no idea how the human body even worked. And yet, their bones suggest bodies that were stronger, leaner, and healthier than most modern adults, which raises an uncomfortable question. What if health wasn't something they achieved? What if it was simply the default? Hunter-gatherers walked an average of 8 to 16 kilometers per day, not on treadmills, not on flat pavement, not in straight lines, across uneven terrain, uphill and downhill, carrying things, crouching, climbing, squatting, lifting in ways that engaged every muscle group simultaneously in patterns no gym machine has ever replicated. The evidence is still sitting in museums. When researchers compared ancient leg bones to modern humans, the results were almost absurd. Some ancient skeletons had stronger leg bones than modern college athletes. Think about that for a second. Not elite warriors, not champions, ordinary people. Not because ancient humans were doing something special, because they were doing what bodies are built to do, and we have almost entirely stopped doing it. Then there is food, and this is where things start getting strange. Ancient hunter-gatherers did not eat a perfect diet. They ate whatever they could find. Some days that was meat. Some days that was tubers and berries and insects and whatever the landscape offered. The key word is variety, not balance, not moderation. Variety. An ancient human could encounter hundreds of different foods across a single year. Different plants, different roots, different fruit, different seasons. The landscape kept changing, so the menu kept changing too. Most modern humans do the opposite. The same breakfast, the same snacks, the same handful of ingredients rearranged into slightly different meals. And something inside us changed with that. When researchers studied one of the last hunter-gatherer populations still living a traditional lifestyle, they found gut ecosystems unlike anything seen in most modern populations. Entire communities of microbes that once lived alongside humans had simply vanished. Not weakened, not reduced, vanished. Which is a strange thing to realize. We spend a lot of time talking about the animals and plants that humans drove to extinction. Almost nobody talks about the ones that disappeared from inside us. Now, here is where it gets complicated, because this is not a story about ancient humans being superior. It is a story about mismatch, about a body that evolved for one set of conditions being dropped into a completely different set of conditions and struggling in ways it was never designed to handle. Take sleep. Imagine explaining modern sleep to an ancient human. You spend all day indoors. You stare at glowing screens after sunset. You stay awake hours after darkness arrives. And then you wonder why you can't fall asleep. To them, that would sound insane. For almost all of human history, the human brain had one way of knowing what time it was: the sky. When the sky got dark, the body prepared for sleep. When the sky got bright, the body prepared to wake up. The system was simple because the signals were simple. Then, almost overnight, in evolutionary terms, humans filled their nights with artificial light. The inputs changed, the software didn't, and we have been dealing with the consequences ever since. But the biggest difference between ancient humans and modern humans is not movement or food or sleep. It is something so obvious that researchers ignored it for decades. Community. Hunter-gatherer bands lived in groups of 30 to 150 people. You knew everyone. Everyone knew you, which sounds restrictive until you compare it to modern life. Thousands of online connections, hundreds of contacts, dozens of conversations, and an epidemic of loneliness. Being alone occasionally was normal. Being chronically isolated was not. You raised children collectively. The anthropological concept of alloparenting, where multiple adults share childcare responsibilities, means that a hunter-gatherer mother was never solely responsible for her child the way a modern parent often is. The chronic low-grade loneliness that researchers now describe as a public health epidemic, affecting roughly 60% of Americans at any given time, according to a 2020 Cigna survey, simply did not exist as a sustained condition. Acute loneliness existed, the sustained, invisible, daily experience of being surrounded by people and still fundamentally alone. That is a modern invention, and the research on what loneliness does to the body is not subtle. A 2015 meta-analysis by Julianne Holt-Lundstad at Brigham Young University found that social isolation increases the risk of premature death by 26%. That is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Your body treats loneliness as a physical threat because for 300,000 years, it was one. A human alone was a human in danger. The alarm system that fires when you feel isolated is the same system that fired when separation from the group meant actual death. The alarm is still accurate. The danger has just changed shape. There is one final difference, and it might be the most important one. Ancient humans had harder lives. That part is true. But harder does not automatically mean more stressful. In fact, the kind of stress that dominates modern life would have been almost unrecognizable to most ancient humans, not because they had fewer problems, because their problems eventually ended. Ancient humans experienced acute stress constantly. A predator, a storm, a hunt going wrong, the body floods with cortisol and adrenaline, the heart rate spikes, every system goes to maximum. And then it ends. The predator leaves, the storm passes, the hunt resolved, and the body returns to baseline. This is what the stress response was designed for. Short, intense, then over. Modern humans experience chronic stress, the deadline that never fully resolved, the financial anxiety that is present every morning, the low-level social performance of being perceived and evaluated constantly, the cortisol that rises in the morning and never fully drops by evening, the immune system that runs permanently slightly elevated and slowly turns on the body itself, autoimmune diseases, conditions where the immune system attacks the body's own tissue, were essentially non-existent in pre-agricultural populations. They are now among the fastest growing categories of disease in the developed world. Researchers at Stanford studying the physiology of the Hadza found cortisol patterns that looked nothing like modern Western cortisol patterns. Spikes at moments of genuine exertion or challenge, drops in the evening to levels that most modern adults never reach at all. Ancient humans were not lucky. They were not living in paradise. They were dying of things that would be trivially preventable today. A broken leg that got infected, a difficult birth, a bad winter. The ceiling of their lives was lower and the floor was more dangerous. But the floor of our lives, the daily baseline of how our bodies feel and function, has quietly dropped in ways we have normalized so completely we do not even recognize them as problem. We call it aging. We call it stress. We call it just how things are. The bones in the ground say otherwise. They say there was a version of this body that walked 12 kilometers a day and ate 150 different plants, and slept when the sky went dark, and woke when it got light, and was never alone, and never chronically stressed, and had joints that lasted a lifetime, and a gut that contained entire ecosystems we have lost forever. That body is still your body, not a different species, not a different model. You, the same brain, the same nervous system, the same hormones, the same instinct. The body waiting in a doctor's office today is running software that was written for a completely different world, a world with more movement, more sunlight, more darkness, more community, more uncertainty, and, strangely, less chronic stress. For hundreds of thousands of years, that body expected one set of conditions. Then, in the blink of an evolutionary eye, everything changed. The food changed, the light changed, the way we move changed, the way we live changed, the way we relate to other people changed. But the body never caught up. And maybe that's what the bones in the ground have been trying to tell us this entire time. Your body is not failing. It is remembering. Remembering a world your mind has completely forgotten.